is Kamonnart Ongwandee from Fashion Revolution Thailand. Hello from Bangkok and sad to miss being in person with you in Cebu today. Today I'll present Making Change, Weaving Community Resilience with Sustainable Fashion, which illustrates my own personal journey from being a designer and a craft maker to a community maker. So, let's start. This is me 6 years ago, after graduated from fashion college and worked a few years in the industry. I began to rethink the way I live and ask myself about my work and practice. So I started a journey to rural Thailand to learn about the textile traditions and hands-on work experience that I hadn't had a chance to learn in college. There, I met a lot of weavers, cotton dyers, spinners, growers, farmers, and I was impressed by their simple life full of meaning. The sad thing is I also learned about their exploitative practice that they are faced in the modern supply chain, both unethical and unsustainable way of trade that they are facing. However, their textiles were super beautiful, and as a craft maker and designer at that time, I was wondering how could I, as a craft person, could sustain this craft to make it alive in today's industrialized and super digitized society. That posed me a question that will change my life afterwards. So a few years later, I found myself in the middle of London near Hyde Park. I was a student at the Royal College of Art doing my master in textile design. The first term started with tutors asked me to make something out of the materials that she put in the middle of the room. I was totally confused, and without a concept and a sketch, how could you make something? Coming from a super logical design background, I was so stressed and nervous. How do I make something? But turned out that my colleagues and friends are super enjoying the challenge, as you can see in this picture. We had a lot of fun making masks, making installations, making sculpture that no one would know what to do with them afterwards. I also collecting a lot of stuff that no one would use and creating something out of it. Something like this that no one even wants to know what is it for. And later in the term, the tutor asked us, what is the meaning of crafts? And these are what we produce during the term to express our understanding of textile and crafter at the moment. So even 2 years ago, we started to talk about how undervalued makers, especially in the textile industry, face, because we are kind of like a silent partner for a lot of other design disciplines. What I learned during that moment of relearning my practice is that I was thinking with my hands instead of thinking with my head during my making practice, and also I relearned to listen and to express myself, to be present, and to have compassion with myself, not to judge myself what is right or wrong when making things. So instead of using hate, I use more hands and heart. I also connected with nature and found peace in making, like meditation. So when we make, we connect with the child within us, and we learn again how to embrace the unknown, be more curious, and still enjoy what we do in the face of social challenges and other circumstances in the world. That is my learning moment that truly helps me to forming Fashion Revolution community afterwards. So after I finished my college, I met some of the founders of the fashion revolution movement. In this image is Carrie Sommers and Ursula de Castro, who are the legends who shaped the fashion revolution movement started in the UK. So what is fashion revolution? Fashion Revolution is the world's largest fashion activism movement. It is a non-profit organization with teams in over 100 countries around the world of passionate volunteers. We campaign for a systemic change and call for the safe, clean, and fair fashion industry. At the time, I knew nothing about systemic change or whatsoever. I wonder how my personal journey as a textile maker and passion for craft could help address these problems. So after coming back to Thailand, I became a country coordinator for Fashion Revolution. At that time, I was wondering how it would be received because the movement for sustainable fashion was still at the budding stage, and not many people knew about the unsustainable practice that the fast fashion industry is doing, and also there's a lack of awareness for craft and textile traditions. So what I do is I started to organize small events that bring together a few stakeholders together in a format of open conversation. I started to do a talks, workshops, and film screening. And during that time, the events are growing and a lot more people joined along the year. People start to be aware about the global warming and the impact of fast fashion during the time for the last 2 years, thanks to the marine plastic thing in Thailand. But also, I got a lot of questions that because sustainable fashion is more expensive, it is quite elitist for people in developing economies, and people said to me that they could not afford and had to continue buying fast fashion and also apply to craft product, which is more expensive. So I began to think, what is wrong, and how might we as a craft maker craft a local solution that can subvert this norm, the norm that saw craft as something far away and not attainable. I think that we can make new social forms of the movement to subvert the throwaway norm and change this mindset. So after hearing these kind of comments, I start to weave a community with more empathy and deep listening. Why? Because I realized that for the past events that I was doing, it was more like a information session and lectures that people had a rare chance to talk and to connect together. So after that, we start a local monthly meetup to share knowledge, reconnect, and hear from people from different aspects and perspectives and backgrounds. It was a safe space for people to connect and to share without the fear of being judged. We have people from producers, from designers, small business owners, and some educators. I met some people who later become my team, and I fell in love with their way of thinking and their humbleness, their creativity, and their sincerity of wanting to make a good for society. These events get rolling into a bigger movement that happened every month, which led to something bigger afterwards. Next activity we did was the mindful consumption. It was a workshop to help people understand fashion as self from within. So instead of forcing people how to dress or what kind of textile or a craft that they should buy or put on themselves, we design a transformative learning experience that people can use art and making process to explore their own identities and patterns and aspirations for expressing their identities. With this, we found out that a lot of people really like because it helped them reconnect with their sense of self in the way that the traditional fashion and textile industry didn't approach them like this. So it was more like an inside-out approach rather than the outside-in and external um, influence on them. Next, it was just last week that we did this urban-rural expedition, which we take urban consumers, our community, to see the real happenings in the rural areas, with the aim to connect urban consumers with local weavers. We took the people to learn how to weave, to learn how to spin, and to connect again their fibers of their clothes with the makers of it. So it was a radical learning experience for them because for some of them, they never knew where their clothes come from or where their fibers are made. So the villagers, these aunties, kindly teach them, and they, in turn, they learn about their life, their food traditions, their soil health, and how it all connects to their clothes. It was like a radical way of learning slow fashion. Next, in Wonderfruit Festival, we also tried experiment with this community mindset. So we designed a mobile golf car with participative co-weaving process that when the car drives around the festival, other people could weave on it and also learn about the Tai Lue textile in collaboration with the Crafting Futures program of the British Council Thailand along the way. This is very well received in the festival, and a lot more young people join and learn how to weave for the first time. We also did some color workshops by taking people to walk the local fresh markets and the streets and talk to people and discuss in the room. There, they document sources of local colors and dyes and materials they found on their environment. So, when the community is ready and ripe for change, we start to introduce the idea of sharing and giving through clothes swap party. It wasn't a new idea, but it was kind of new for a Thai community that they had still have a social stigma for secondhand being seen as poor and like torn and not very luxury experience buying old clothes. However, um, we accomplished to convince people to buy less and pay less and instead use more and share more. And also the young crowd could enjoy sustainable fashion way of consumption without financial burden. We got around 300 people since we started doing, and this is already answering the first questions that sustainable fashion doesn't have to always be expensive. In November alone, our event had generated and we had collect around 1,300 items, with half of them found a new owner to take home, and half of them goes to Pangan, which is a charity shop similar to Oxfam, which sell these clothes to raise money for children in need for education. So we 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 found that the community approach is very successful, and this is another initiative, the last one that I want to show you. It's called Circular Design Lab Bangkok, which is a self-organized and citizen-driven project organized by some educators, people from the UN, Fashion Revolution communities, and other interested in air pollution and waste management in Bangkok. We came together on Saturdays to focus on prototyping and delivering solutions to some of these urban challenges with systemic design thinking. That is me sitting on the floor and doing some brainstorming with the community. We also walk on the streets and research and interviews some of the local vendors, including some 7-Eleven shopkeepers and cashiers about their consumption and behavior. It was very fun, and also I had a chance to co-design the solutions with the local people for the local people. So to ask what works well for this initiative that had been done in the past few years, I think the maker blood in me is very beneficial for this experimentation because it kind of pushed me into implementing the action without fear, and thus it got effects and then got feedback in a much faster way than being a traditional designer where I need something to be perfect and sketching hundreds of plans without really producing it. With a maker mindset, I had made and produced an event, an experience, and a place that people could come together and gain feedbacks. So by the time growth, I already got a lot of feedbacks and iterations and improvements for my initiative. Also, I noticed that by bringing people together, it helps bridge the value action gap and also help people rediscover and reconnect with community-based values such as sharing, giving, a sense of belonging and empowerment, and also their own identity locally and globally. We also created a circle of friends, which that later become a volunteer family, and people start to realize that the interconnectedness of craft, communal, and individual well-being is kind of the same thing and can nurture our sense of self and also bring back political power into people. And what could be better is that this kind of thing takes time, and system change is not an overnight process, but the collective actions and development of ideas is indeed significant for change. But we also have to be aware about our approach. We need to be aware and reduce our self-centeredness and be mindful and always be questioning. One of the things that I really noticed is that after these few years of running this movement, giving people information alone rarely changed their behavior. Seeing this iceberg model, behavior is just like the surface of things, but we realized that to change someone or a collective behavior or old norms that doesn't work anymore, we need to dig deep into the value set and the belief of these groups. So that is our own focus for this year. What about the opportunities for makers? So I would love to emphasize on these topics of not being sticking to being a maker of things, but instead becoming the makers of ecosystem. According to Disrupt Design by Leila, she taught us system thinking, and I really like this info in visual notes that she put on her medium that illustrates how the old paradigm and the new paradigm thinking of craft and design can be illustrated. So instead of seeing things as separate parts, we see things as a whole, from linear to nonlinear and circular, from hierarchies to networks, and from objects to relationships, which is really compatible with the digital community and the nature of flexible community we have today, not being bound by geographic. Some of the other opportunity is that I see that community is a safe space for opportunity. It creates meaningful encounters, which then enable ecosystems that people could share and collaborate. This creates a collaborative economy that people aren't fear to share their own belongings or their own skills or even their own opinions with others. There, then this kind of ecosystems that everyone feels safe and being listened to creates a resilient and socially sustainable society, which then transform from activism to reality. These are like a conclusion of my own community making practice in the past few years. However, if we want to move towards the new paradigm for holistic sustainability in the 21st century, we need to ask what does leaders mean again, and we need to define once again what does craft and leadership mean. If makers are to be part of this transformative social change movement, if we want this transition and enhance our leadership capabilities, I have a few slides that might spark your ideas how makers could be leaders. So first, makers as leaders. It is a difficult but also a really fulfilling feeling if you achieve the balance of autonomy and collaboration. So a balance of yin and yang in everything you do with the use of your hands, heart, and hate. So the reason why the hands are the first step is because that as a maker, you think through hands and you think through actions, and you do not need a perfect thing in your head or a sketch or waiting for someone above to enable you to do something. Instead, you use your hands and everything you have to start making something. Then after that making, you learn and you feel from your heart, you connect to other people and listen to each other with compassion and with open mind. And then the last part was the hate. So after you feel and you embody all the feelings in the body, you start to reflect on the learnings and experience you had and kind of memorize it in the head and start to build a new skills in the brain. So these kind of loops are how makers with the craft approach could be leaders. That is very suitable for today's leadership needs, because today's leaders need to be listened to new ideas rather than think from their head and order thing and manage things from top-down policy. Second, for craft to be more relevant, it has to be dialogical, inclusive, and also compassionate. And as maker, we have capabilities to listen, to ask, and to observe things with careful details and careful approach. We can observe and kind of facilitate the needs of many stakeholders into one, restore harmony of a lot of opinions into one. We can use our sensitivity to materials, to atmosphere, to the air, to the conversation, to create something beautiful out of that. And last, I want to present makers as progressive social innovators because inspired by Ezio Mancini, he said that even in these difficult times, a better kind of society is possible. and in his book Politics of the Everyday, has already presented how an individual or a community could craft a choice together to make a network of support for each other. So as a maker, we can enable people to craft their own lives and make everyday choices for systemic change. With these approaches of makers as leaders, I emphasize that sustainability today that is perceived as a limited and neoliberal kind of reserved for a few could be changed into a more holistic and inclusive web of care for many. As William Morris said in his statement, I do not want art for a few any more than I want education for a few or freedom for a few. So if makers to be a leader in this volatile time, we need to come back to the very core meaning of what craft means, what is it for, and why we lead. These are the conclusions of how I see makers with the capabilities to lead. So three things. First, we are a good leader. We could be a good leader because we are contemplative. With mindful making practice, it helps us knowing ourselves deeply with acceptance, without the fear of being judged or even judging ourselves, which is the foundation of why we can lead others or be good for the society in the next step. Second, participative. We realize that after being mindful of our own life, our own practice, we learn from each other. So by learning together with each other, it contributes to the empowerment of both individual and collective scale as a whole. So participative, co-design, co-living, co-making as a making of new society. And the last thing is the capability for reflection. Being reflective enables us to look at challenges from various perspectives and develop a critical and systemic thinking skills, which other disciplines might be less advantageous in these terms, because as a maker, you always need to look at things from the 360 degree and from the source, from the soil to the skin. So it is well-rounded viewpoint and also a reflective viewpoint that help us make a critical decision and think beyond the obvious results. We think in terms of interconnection and the impact for other things. Lastly, I want to emphasize that from these capabilities of makers as leaders, we can reconnect and restore the lost connections between people and makers and sources of their materials and material culture to be lively again, even in the digitized world. So yeah, that is for me, and yeah, excited to be joining the panel. And if you want to see more of our work, please follow the Fashion Revolution Thailand social media. Thank you.